Ahí sí. Muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Es un
Good
grato placer
afternoon,
tenerlos acá
ladies and gentlemen.
en
It's a pleasure to
esta,
have you all here
que será la última
in this
sesión
last
del
session
seminario, de los seminarios que hemos
of
tenido
the
desde
different
el mes de
seminars which we
octubre
have had
para ir acompañando el proceso constituyente, entregando elementos de formación de juicio sobre distintas materias. Hemos hecho seminarios sobre procesos constituyentes ya terminados, hemos hecho seminarios sobre finanzas públicas, sobre régimen político, hemos hecho charlas sobre derechos sociales. Ha sido una cobertura bastante amplia de temas. Y hoy día, para terminar esta serie, hemos invitado a Stefan Voigt. Stefan es profesor de la Universidad de Hamburgo, en Alemania, y es un economista que ha trabajado en forma bastante única, yo diría, el tema constitucional desde una perspectiva comprensiva, ¿no? Y él publicó este libro, a ver si que ustedes lo ven, yo lo tengo aquí en mi Kindle, a ver si se ve, ahí está. Se llama Constitutional Economics, Economía de la Constitución. Aquí lo estoy leyendo, Stefan. Te pongo las marcas, o sea, it's not a joke. Entonces es una persona que viene hace muchos años reflexionando sobre las constituciones, ha examinado muchos casos y ha tenido la generosidad de estar conversando con nosotros desde hace algún tiempo. Con Diego organizamos un taller para constituyentes, que esto Stefan no lo sabe, pero la estructura del taller está sacada del libro, está basada en la distinción entre medidas horizontales y verticales. El taller estuvo organizado en torno a esa lógica. De manera que Stefan ha influenciado mucho este pensamiento que hemos tratado de convocar con Diego y que hemos llevado a todos ustedes. Entonces, Stefan va a hablar de un punto particular del problema constitucional, que es el tema del régimen político, desde la opinión de un economista, y un economista alemán que viene de un contexto muy particular, que dicho sea de paso, desde Chile se mira con mucho interés como un modelo, no a copiar, porque estas cosas no se copian, pero sí de inspiración. Y estamos mirando constantemente a Alemania las cosas que hace, así que es muy importante lo que tú nos puedas compartir, Stefan. Y van a comentar esta presentación Claudia Sangüesa, que ustedes probablemente la conocen. Es una persona que ha adquirido creciente notoriedad en la discusión de temas económicos y constitucionales. Claudia es doctora en economía en la Universidad de Cambridge y trabaja hoy día en la Universidad Mayor. Tiene un centro cuyo nombre en este minuto se me escapa, pero dirige el centro. Claudia, ¿cómo se llama el centro? You're muted. Estás calladita.
Disculpa.
Ahí.
Centro de Economía y Políticas Sociales.
Ya, eso. De la Universidad Mayor, así que muchas gracias, Claudia, por tu participación. Y va a comentar también Diego Pardo. Diego Pardo, que ustedes sí conocen porque lo han visto múltiples veces. Diego hemos sido coorganizadores de toda esta serie. Hemos hecho como 20 seminarios de esto, más 20 y tantos del taller, así que ya tenemos una experiencia bastante larga con Diego organizando estos talleres. Diego es abogado, pero tiene un doctorado en Law and Economics en Berkeley, y la verdad es que sabe más de economía que una cantidad gigantesca de economistas. Le agradecemos también a Diego las reflexiones que va a compartir con nosotros. Entonces, la presentación de Stefan va a ser en inglés y la conversación va a ser probablemente mayoritariamente en inglés también. Ustedes pueden acceder a la traducción del inglés al español en el streaming de YouTube. Ahí va a estar. De ahí también pueden mandar mensajes para si quieren hacer preguntas. De manera que va a haber cobertura tanto en inglés como en español. Agradecemos muchísimo entonces a Stefan y te damos la palabra. Dankeschön und willkommen.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a very generous introduction. Let me try to share my slide with you, and this is not large enough. I assume now it's Acceptar, yeah. So I assume you can now see it. So first of all, thanks very much to Guillermo, the organizer, and to the others who have made this possible. It's really a great honor, and I'm really thrilled to be with you this afternoon. For you, for me, it's already a bit later, obviously. So I want to share just some ideas with you. Let me see how. Well, this doesn't seem to be working. Okay, here we go. So let me start a little bit with what is seen sort of as the current issue, or what are seen as the current issues with regard to the Constitution of Chile from the outside. What I perceive, by having read a little bit about what's going on in your country, and it seems to be there seem to be two issues that are at least frequently mentioned in the press that I've read. So the first one seems to be a certain lack of the legitimacy of the current constitution, and the second issue that's raised very frequently is the inequality of society, which would be visible in education, but also in the healthcare sector and the pension system. So this is the issue with regard, or the issues with regard to Chile, and this takes place. I mean, the constitution making process in your country takes place sort of in front of the backdrop of a number of worldwide trends, which I tend to be thinking of as deplorable worldwide trends. So one is the trend towards more populism, which is combined with what has been called democratic backsliding, and we could also talk of constitutional backsliding, constitutions being complied with to a lesser degree. So I think there are essentially two challenges that you are confronted with. So the first challenge is how to produce a document that all relevant societal groups can consent to. So in other words, the attempt to have a new social contract. And the second one, which I want to take into account a little bit this afternoon, is this trend of populism. So what needs to be taken into account is how can one increase at least the probability that constitutions will be complied with. That's a perennial problem for all constitutions in all countries. And secondly, also, how can one make sure that in case there is, or there could be a populist government in the future, how can one make sure that the damage it might do can be sort of contained by the way in which the constitution is designed? So this is more or less the idea, and I'll go about talking about these issues in those remaining 4 steps. So I'll talk a little bit about the perennial challenge that essentially all constitutions, not only the one in Chile, but all constitutions face. And then Guillermo asked me to talk a little bit about the form of government and the various options and the consequences from an economic point of view. So that's going to be the main focus of my talk. I just have 2 slides where I talk about the relevance of the electoral system, and then I already conclude. Okay, so let me first, before getting to the form of government, talk a little bit about the perennial challenge that constitutions are confronted with. So in a sense, you can think of a constitution as the most basic legal document of a country. There is no more basic one, right? You can think of some international treaties as constraining and binding a country, but within the domestic sphere, the constitution is generally, conventionally seen as the most basic document. This constitution usually contains quite a few promises. It contains promises not to interfere with certain aspects of individuals' lives. It contains promises to respect private property, establish and protect private property. It contains many promises, but I also might contain positive promises in the sense of the right to work, the right to a home, the right to paid nap during work time, whatever it is, okay? And the challenge seems to be how to ensure that these promises are complied with. Sort of more generally speaking, how can we make sure, or how can one make sure that politicians basically comply with the constraints the promises and/or constraints laid down in the Constitution. Okay, so this is a general problem. Obviously, if the Constitution is the most basic legal document, it needs to be, and that's what economists would say, it needs to be made self-enforceable. So the question is a little bit, how can one at least increase the probability, the chances that this document that we call the Constitution, this really basic document, will indeed be complied with and will indeed be followed by politicians. And there's a very traditional answer, separation of powers. That answer has been around at least since Montesquieu, with the three branches. And the basic idea really there is, give different political actors different roles and sort of make them control each other. In the US, they talk about check, check, counter check. So if these three branches basically control each other, this would increase the likelihood that the Constitution is being complied with. Now, the question is, can we already learn something or infer something regarding the not the design, the architecture of the various branches, but the substantive content regarding rights? So one possible, very carefully formulated, one possible inference could be that there should be an emphasis on justiciable rights, right? Because if you want to have a third branch, the courts, enforce watch and enforce, watch the other branches and enforce the rights, then aspirational rights might not be very helpful. Our country is striving to do that. Our country is striving at full employment or a healthy environment or something like that. That's very difficult to enforce. So if you want to really set up the apex court, the highest court of the country, as a watchdog of the other two branches, then there should be an emphasis on justiciable rights. Okay, so this is the first thing. Now, over the last 20 years or so, people have discussed what has become known as the new separation of powers. I think Bruce Ackerman from Yale was the first to use that that term. And he has basically also talked of the new separation of powers as a sort of fourth branch, which would be the integrity branch. And in essence, one can think of this, more fine-grained separation of powers as consisting of two branches itself. Okay, so one would be where a number of additional agencies are endowed with policy-making functions, such as the central bank. I'll say a little bit about the logic behind that in a second. And the other could be to basically install some additional agencies or actors as monitors or watchdogs of the three established branches. These could be ombudspersons or anti-corruption agencies or more. Okay, so the issue is why, or the question is, why would one want to give some policy-making power, such as the power to make monetary supply decisions, away from the government to an independent central bank? And the issue is that, well, if we promise price stability in the Constitution as one aspect of secure property rights, that's one promise. But if government learns that it can make itself more popular by increasing monetary supply shortly before elections, it has all the incentives in the world to do so. Okay, so in order to basically relieve that tension, it might make sense to give the decisions regarding monetary supply to an independent body. In this case, for example, to a central bank, and that sort of reasoning can be applied to other agencies as well. So this is sort of a second way to hopefully make sure that the promises contained in the Constitution of a country are more likely to be complied with. And there's, a third one would be to try to empower citizens. So the logic there would be, if government sort of tries to attempt to renege on the constitutional constraints, if it basically expects to be faced by lots and powerful opposition, demonstrations in the street, etc., it is less likely to try to do so in the first place. So in other words, the question is, how can one empower citizens as relevant constitutional actors, as supposedly a potentially important watchdog of what politicians do. And there's three possible implications. One possible implication is that if the Constitution relies on very precise and clear and easy language, then it'll be easier for citizens to decide whether the government is currently complying with the Constitution or not. Now, if it's crystal clear what the Constitution says, there might be more unity in opposition, which obviously is a precondition for mass demonstrations. If it's unclear, are they complying or they're not complying, then the likelihood of demonstrations seems to be less likely. So a clear and precise language, easy to understand, comprehensible Constitution might help here. Secondly, this is an interesting point, and there is some recent evidence. In fact, they published a whole book about this. The book is by Adam Chilton from Chicago, and Mila Versteeg, who's from Virginia. They have the following story. They say if the Constitution guarantees group rights in the sense of the right to form an association, the right to form a party, the right to form groups of people, then in all likelihood, people are going to use that right, and there will be associations, parties, etc. formed. Now, once a government decides that it doesn't like this anymore, the degree of opposition is likely to be fairly high, because there are these people are already organized, so they don't need to be organizing as a consequence of some government not complying with the Constitution, but they are already organized, which increases the likelihood of government complying with the Constitution in the first place. Okay, and they have lots of stories about this, and the book came out with should have prepared. I think it came out with Oxford, but it might have been Chicago or Cambridge University Press, one of the university presses. It came out in 2020, so it's easy to find. Adam Chilton and Mila Versteeg are the names. And finally, obviously, media freedom is truly important and should also be part of the Constitution, in the sense that citizens will only learn about attempts of the governing to renege upon the Constitution, not to comply with the constitutional constraints, if the media is free to report on that. So these are sort of three possible implications if one wants to empower citizens as potential players, potentially relevant players in this entire game. Now let me move on to the main topic I was assigned this afternoon, namely choosing the form of government. So this is the world according to regime types as it appeared some time ago, namely in 2008. I'm sorry I didn't produce a more a recent table. The reason is that the data set ends in 2008. So what does this give here? First of all, it sort of separates democracies from autocracies. So the 0, 1, and 2 coded countries here are democracies, and the countries coded 3, 4, 5 are autocracies. Okay. Now the thing here is that the people who produce this, Chaeboop, Gandhi, and Freeland, they basically go a little further in making distinctions between regime types. So the dark blue ones here are the parliamentary regimes of the world. The whatever it is, turquoise or this mixture between green and blue are the semi-presidential types of the world, and the green ones are the presidential types. The presidential form of government. And as you can see, with regard to Latin America, it's green, 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 right? So it's the presidential form of government. Let's within democracy. So let's have a quick look at the non-democracies. They make a distinction between civil, between military, and royal. So Saudi Arabia and Morocco, they have a king, so they are coded red here. Military regimes you see in Egypt and other countries. So this is the world a number of years back, and by looking that most of South America here is green with just very few exceptions. One would expect that the next constitution of Chile might also be relying on the presidential form of government. And I want to discuss that choice in a little more detail with you right now. So let's first talk about how economists and also political scientists, but economists are simple persons, so they like to reduce complexity even more than political scientists. So usually there's only a distinction made between presidential and parliamentary systems. So semi-presidential systems do not really figure very prominently in this in this whole debate. And the dividing criterion, to decide whether a country has a presidential form of government or a parliamentary form of government is the simple and unique question: does the country have a vote of no confidence? Okay, so the idea is if the country knows a vote of no confidence, if the government, the head of government and the cabinet can be brought down by a vote of no confidence in the legislature and parliament, then it's supposed to be a parliamentary system. And if no such vote of no confidence exists, then it's supposed to be presidential. Okay, so that's this, it's very simple single criterion allocating countries to be either or. Okay, so here are one or two direct implications from that. So obviously, the heads of government and presidential systems, the presidents, are more insulated from the legislature, from parliament, than in parliamentary ones. They're elected for 4 years or 3 years or 7 years, whatever it is, and in essence, except for impeachment, but in essence, their tenure, their term in office is very certain. Okay. So those are the defining elements of presidential versus parliamentary systems. So now I want to basically talk about two opposing schools. I mean, the schools of thought, that sounds very cathedratic or something like that. It's probably not, but there are people who basically favor the advantages of presidential systems and others who favor the advantages of parliamentary systems. So let's talk a little bit about the various arguments that are part of the debate. So some people argue that the degree of separation of powers, which is supposed to be a good thing, limits power of each and individual player, is higher under a presidential form of government. So that would be an argument in favor of having the presidential form of government. And let's have a look at least at some of the arguments that are being named here. So one argument would be that the president, if he is or she is directly elected, would have basically interest to serve all citizens of the country. So he or she would be the only person with a genuine interest in really trying to serve everybody. So the argument from economists then goes, well, if that is the case, then proposals to pass laws that are only serving subgroups, or that are subsidies to specific industries, etc., are likely to be vetoed by the president. So in other words, the assumption is that, well, if you have one person trying to represent the nation as a whole, then that person has an incentive to stop legislative measures that are not really welfare increasing in the traditional sense. Okay, whereas the opposite would go that in parliamentary systems, you need a strong collaboration, if you want, between the executive and the legislature. After all, the legislature has the power to throw out the prime minister on any single day, which could basically mean that if the legislators want to spend more, well, the executive will do so. There might be higher levels of corruption, and at the end of the day, lower levels of productivity. That would be a direct consequence of the president vetoing all non-welfare increasing pieces of legislation. So if parliamentary governments basically depend on the continued support of the legislators, then they might basically be giving in to the wishes of some legislators. And at the end of the day, these people expect sort of lower productivity levels of parliamentary systems. Okay, so that is a number of arguments. Now, this school of thought, or the school of argumentation, has been criticized for a number of reasons, or for a number of aspects. So one is that in practice, the separation of powers is not automatically higher under the presidential form of government. So there are. So it seems that people look at the U.S. And then they say, okay, this is the prototypical type of separation of powers under a presidential system, and this is how it works. But having a look at Africa shows that in many cases presidents are sort of able to circumvent the intended separation of powers by, for example, making many members of parliament a member of their cabinet. And if they, if the cabinet position is well paid, well, what interest do they have in controlling the president? So in that sense, this idea of having a more traditional separation of powers is breaking down if there are ways to basically circumvent this. Then the second argument could be, well, we know that presidents are more insulated, right? They're more tenure is more secure, as we said a minute ago. But we also know that in many countries, slush funds exist, and presidents can rely on executive decrees. So that's another way, basically, to circumvent the legislature. Okay. We also know that parties are generally less well organized under presidential systems. Why is that important? Well, it could be important in the case when a president tries to renege on the Constitution, not comply with the constitutional constraints, because then you need strong parties to tell them, hey, this is not within the confines of the Constitution. I might point to the strength, or rather the weakness, of the Republican Party in the U.S. right now, as as one example that we are all familiar with. So the second, sorry, the second school, the school that basically stresses the advantages of a parliamentary system, basically stresses the higher accountability of prime ministers, of cabinets, of heads of government under a parliamentary system, right? So the accountability is a daily accountability. On any single day, a majority of parliament can get rid of a prime minister. Okay. Actually, just as a historical note, we had some issues with that during the Weimar Republic, because there was always a negative correlation, between the extreme right and the extreme left. So they were always able to kick out the prime minister, but obviously they were never able to agree on who should be the successor. Okay, so this is why the German Constitution has this construction of what we call a constructive vote of no confidence. So there, the idea is by voting in favor of a new chancellor, in our case, the old one is out of office. So only if you are able to agree, if you are able to manage to organize the necessary majority to vote somebody into office, can you get rid of the previous one. So with that construction, I guess the German Constitution, with the post-World War II German Constitution, was the first that had that. And basically, the idea is to make sure that the country has an acting prime minister all the time. Okay. So yeah, well, I gave you already the general advantage, that is seen by this school. Well, the government, the executive, is accountable to the legislature all the time. So in a sense, the preferences of the legislature need to be taken much more seriously than under presidential systems. Arend Leipert, the political scientist, introduced this distinction between consensual and majoritarian systems, and the idea is that there are some systems in the world where a simple majority is sufficient enough to basically dictate all the policies of a country, whereas consensual regimes are those where you try to take more people into onto the boat. And in a sense, parliamentary ones can be seen as more consensual, because this vote in favor of a president might have been relevant 4 or 5 years ago, but it might not be relevant today anymore. So he can still, or he or she can still make decisions, although many walks of society would not be in favor of that person and his or her policies anymore. Okay, so we have basically two more or less different views. One praising the advantages of a presidential system, the other one praising the advantages of a parliamentary system. So we have opposing predictions, and that's always nice for an economist, because now we can look at the data. We can see whether we can see any differences if we look at the data. You might be familiar. This is by now is a pretty famous book, and has been cited thousands of times by Thorsten Persson, a Swedish colleague, and Guido Tabellini, an Italian colleague, who published this book, The Economic Effects of Constitutions. And essentially what they do is they look at the economic effects of forms of government, and they look at the economic effects of electoral systems. So there's many more things to look at, but this is what they do in their paper. And what they do is that, well, they say, since they also look at electoral systems, they only look at democracies. And then they have a couple of additional criteria to make up their sample. It needs to have been a democracy for so many years, and it needs to have at least a minimum number of population, etc. And they basically code all democracies that do not have a vote of no confidence as presidential. Okay, and if you follow their approach, this is what they get. They find that democracies with a presidential system have government expenditures that are some 6 percentage points of GDP less than parliamentary ones. So this is, if this would be causal, these are just associations, okay? But if this would be causal, this would be a huge effect. Moreover, presidential systems spend between 2 and 3 percentage points of GDP, again, less on social and welfare programs. They suffer less from corruption. But contrary to what some of the discussion, some of the hypotheses that I just discussed would predict, they do slightly worse than parliamentary systems regarding productivity. Okay, but it's not highly significant. Now the question is, how much trust should we have in these results? Not even discussing whether they are causal or not, but first asking how robust are they? And this is a bit unclear. With a couple of grad students, I basically tried to replicate the results. The replication was fine, but if you add, some detail, if you just change the sample size a little bit by including smaller countries, or if you change the time period considered, just small little changes, then we can most of these effects go away. Okay. Now others say if you change their estimation approach just a little bit, if you use a more adequate identification strategy, then the results will become even stronger. Now, there have been other other studies, not those by Pessin and Tabellini, but other studies have, for example, found that corruption in presidential systems seems to be higher. Okay, so in other words, it's a bit unclear how robust the Pessin Tabellini findings really are. But before sort of inquiring how they are really, whether they're really robust or not, I want to basically raise a different question, namely, which of the reported effects are normatively desirable? I mean, many economists would say, well, government expenditure should be small, or there should be little spending on social and welfare programs. But this might not be the answer of a majority of people in Chile. Okay. Now, if inequality is a huge problem, and if the health sector, but also the pension system, are being criticized, then spending less on social and welfare programs might not really be your primary goal. Okay. So in essence, it's important to be clear about what is normatively desirable. Okay, and secondly, there is an indicator constructed a number of years back by a political scientist, which is called the Parliamentary Powers Index. So basically, it tries to, by a fairly long list of criteria and adding them up, it tries to ascertain how many competences, how much power, in a sense, legislatures have. Okay, and for a specific sample of countries, a fairly large sample, this is not all the countries that are covered by FISH, but a very large one. We find the following bivariate correlation. So presidential systems are negatively correlated with parliamentary powers, and parliamentary systems are about the same size, positively correlated with parliamentary powers. So this, in a sense, makes perfect sense, right? If you have a prime minister who is dependent on government, then on parliament, sorry, on the legislature, it seems that legislatures would have more powers, and this is basically borne out by this. Now, an interesting additional observation is that positive values of the Parliamentary Powers Index are very highly correlated with levels of democracy. Okay, so be careful. I'm not saying this is causal. I'm not saying if a country has a parliamentary system, this will increase the level of democracy. But there is a very significant association between giving the parliament lots of powers and having a high level of democracy. Okay, and well, another consideration could be this. I mentioned before that the president in a presidential system enjoys a number of very unique features, and he would be the only, or he or she would be the only one basically representing, being elected by potentially the entire country, and therefore the only one representing the entire country, and therefore being interested in making most everybody better off, which was the reason given in the literature for the expectation that presidents would basically veto legislation that would only be to the benefit of special groups. Okay, so that was one argument of the first school that expected to see a higher level of productivity in those countries, which was not borne out by the data. Just to keep you in mind, to remind you. But actually, this very special position of the president, if you think in terms of populism and constitutional and / democratic backsliding, and the wish of the Constitution to be complied with, that might actually be a problem. And here is this is actually was summarized by Duverger, and this is the position that Charles de Gaulle, or the perception of his own position that Charles de Gaulle, the president of France, had back in 1964. So he was basically of the opinion that the indivisible authority of the state is entrusted completely to the president by the people who elected him, that there existed no other authority, either ministerial, civil, military, or judiciary, which has not been conferred and was not being maintained by him. And finally, that it was his duty to adapt the supreme domain, which is his alone, to fit in with those, the control of which he delegates to others. So in other words, what I'm saying is this might be quite a bit dangerous to give a single person basically the legitimacy of saying, or the position of saying, I am the only person in town, I'm the only person in this game who's basically been elected by all of you. Okay, all others just, they have their small little constituency, or they have been appointed by some cumbersome process to the judiciary or whatever it is. But I'm the only guy in town who's been elected by all of you. So in a sense, there might be a danger that presidents have a higher tendency than prime ministers to overstep their constitutional constraints. Okay. Remember, they are more insulated, so they, it's rather difficult and cumbersome and challenging to kick them out of office once they should do that. With a prime minister, don't forget, you can do that every single day. So, so this might be, generally speaking, a danger that countries that choose a presidential form of government are more subject to than countries having chosen a parliamentary form of government. Now, taking up a little bit this unpleasant trend of populism and democratic backsliding, would probably make one be cautious regarding the possibility of particular persons to overstep the Constitution if one wants the Constitution to be a binding document. Now, I think there's fairly good evidence that many would-be autocrats, those who are elected by popular election, but basically strive to be staying in power, they prefer presidential over parliamentary systems. Right? As an example, I give you Erdogan. There was the coup in 2016, and he basically used the post-coup time to switch the regime from parliamentary to presidential. Then we have some evidence that incumbent takeovers, where people who might have been elected to office in a regular fashion, then decide to sort of overstay, to stay longer than they were supposed to stay, are 10 times more likely under presidential systems than under parliamentary ones. This is at least a finding by Slovic, published in the British Journal of Political Science a number of years back. So in other words, if sort of non-compliance with the Constitution is a potential issue, then presidential forms of government might be problematic, and also if overstaying or incumbent takeovers might be a danger, at least in general, that then the same argument basically applies. Now, what are possible consequences for Chile? I'm obviously just an outside observer. I've not even been to Chile once, so who am I to give any advice? But just possible consequence from the considerations that I've been trying to spell out. Well, it could be that a parliamentary form of government makes a lot of sense, and if the Constitutional Assembly should be going that way, the second consideration could be that one could be thinking about the parliamentary form of government unamendable. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? In Germany, we have the 1949 Constitution, the current one, has one article in which it says there are actually two other articles that cannot be amended. Okay, this is Article 1 of the Constitution, basically protecting the dignity of persons, and Article 20, basically establishing the structure of a federal state in Germany. So these cannot be amended. So there's no way, except if you write a completely new constitution, to get rid of the dignity and or the state structure. So in a sense, if one is convinced that the parliamentary form of government is really the form of government that one should go for, but is aware that would-be autocrats sort of enjoy more being the head of government under a presidential form of government, then one way to reduce the likelihood of this happening would be to make the parliamentary form of government unamendable. Obviously, this doesn't exclude that some government simply tries to write an entirely new constitution, but that would in all likelihood reduce the legitimacy of that government. Okay. Now, I know I'm speaking to a part of the world where the presidential form of government has been the rule, as I showed you in the map that I showed you some time ago. So it might sound a bit strange to say, why don't you think about having a parliamentary form of government? So assuming that you don't follow me, there are still a number of considerations that could still be relevant if Chile decides to stick with the presidential form of government. So I'm limiting. I'm giving you four examples here. So term limits seem to be very important. So I think it's important to be very clear about term limits. You know that term limits, if they are not really precise, can be interpreted in various ways. I mean, Russia is an example of a guy who switches between president and prime minister and back. So that's one. If one goes for term limits, I think one should be very precise. Secondly, I mentioned the potential problem, at least, of executive decrees. Because in a sense they exactly reduce the separation of powers by making the legislature more less important. So one could also think about how the use of executive decrees can be limited, and one might want to constitutionalize that. Further. I wrote a paper on these issues 2 years back. So this is not what President Trump is doing today or has been doing. I haven't been following the news, so I don't know how many thousand people he has pardoned today. But obviously, one might want to limit the power to pardon criminals, to very specific cases. And then, if one is interested in this high degree of separation of powers, I think it also makes sense to make sure that people who have become a member of the cabinet, who have become a member of the executive, are not, cannot stay a member of the legislature at the same time. I mean, if that is the argument in favor of presidential systems, then you want to make sure that is not only conceptually the case, but that is the case in practice. So then one might think about saying, okay, as soon as somebody accepts to be a member of cabinet, he or she has to basically leave his seat in parliament. Okay, I guess that's all I want to say right now on the form of government. Let me. How am I doing on time? If I have like 2, 3, 4 more minutes, then. I want to say just a word or two on the relevance of electoral systems. Now, what I have in mind when I talk about electoral systems is basically the rules that translate electoral votes into parliamentary seats. Okay, it's the mechanism that is the procedure that is being used for translating electoral votes into parliamentary seats. And the amazing thing is. According to a study that was published some 10 years ago, Elkins, Ginsburg, and Melton, 2009, with Cambridge University Press, only around 20% of all constitutions of the world contain an explicit mention of of the electoral system used in that country. And I think it makes a lot of sense, and would make a lot of sense to include the electoral system explicitly in a country's constitution. Before making that argument in a little more detail, let me give you the relevant dimensions of what I believe to be the relevant dimensions of electoral systems. So usually people talk about the electoral rule, first past the post, majority rule, plurality rule, whatever you want to call it, on the one hand, versus proportional representation on the other. That is what most people talk about most of the time. But there are a number of additional dimensions that are highly relevant. I mean, some are correlated with the electoral rule, but some are not. So the size of electoral districts that can be very, very different. I mean, in majority rule countries, we usually have one-member districts. In Germany, we have a mixed system, so we have two-member districts. But there are also countries like Israel or the Netherlands that only, where the entire country is one single district. So district size can vary quite a bit. And then, as a third aspect, the question is: do all candidates need to be part of a party list? Or is it possible to be elected into parliament as an individual? Okay, so that might be very important. If you want to have strong party discipline, well, then put all parties in then make it necessary to be part of a party list. But if you want to have some more independent thinkers, some potentially more critical thinkers, etc., then it might make sense to have a higher degree of individually elected candidates. The more potentially the more substantial, the most relevant argument in favor of individually elected candidates is that if people in a specific district know this is my representative, then it's easier for them to make him or her accountable. Okay, it's easier to, in a sense, to control what that person does than if you are hiding behind a list of 120 colleagues, okay, where it is sort of unclear who speaks for whom and who presents whom, etc. So that would speak in favor of rather small districts and of enabling individual candidates to be running and sort of to reduce the power of parties with regard to this aspect. And then I added, this is often not being done, but I added this because I believe it's important when to think about electoral systems, is the agency that is monitoring the elections. How should that be set up? How independent do we want it to be from government? Is it organized as a court, or is it organized as different independent body, etc.? And then this is not so relevant with proportional representation. What is highly relevant with regard to majority rule is who has the power to do the redistricting. So every now and then, some redistricting seems to be necessary. If the population of Santiago grows a lot faster than the rural areas in Chile, then you want to reshape districts that they represent more or less the same number of voters. Okay, so every now and then you just need to check whether each and every district more or less represents the same number of voters. So there is a need for redistricting every now and then. But as you know, in the US, this is a huge enterprise. You have very strange shapes of district because it's being misused basically by politicians. So here again, it seems to be important to have some sort of general procedure of who does the redistricting and what time, after how many years it's being done, etc. And that should be done by an independent agency. This is particularly relevant, obviously, if you have majority rule systems, because in proportional rule it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day it's the proportion of votes in the entire country that determines the number of seats that a party will get. Okay. So this is what I have in mind when I talk about electoral systems, and I just want to give one example for how important it can be. So Viktor Orban in Hungary and his party, the Fidesz party, in 2011, they won only around 50% of the popular vote. Okay. But that translated into a 2/3 majority in parliament. So this was the majority that Orban basically needed to rewrite the constitution. So with a bare 50% of the vote, he was basically empowered. He had the possibility to write an entirely new constitution. And if you're following European events, you know that this new constitution causes much of the issues and much of the trouble between Hungary and the European Union. Okay, so if you consider this here, then I would think a proportional system would make a lot of sense, because according to a proportional system, if it's truly proportional, then if you win around 50% of the popular vote, you will win around 50% of the parliamentary seats. It might be a little more depending on what the threshold is. In Germany we have a 5% threshold. Other countries have a 3% threshold. So only parties or candidates that have won more than 3 or 5% of the vote are considered to be sent to parliament. If you're a very small party, your votes will not be counted, which basically implies that very large parties will get a share that's a little above their vote share, but not from some 50% to more than 67%. Okay, and so there might be two conclusions. So this might be an argument in favor of a proportional system, and it also and I started these two slides with this idea because electoral systems are so important. It might be a good reason to constitutionalize electoral systems in the sense of explicitly including at least the basic dimensions of the electoral system in a country's constitution. Remember, a minute ago, I said that only 20% of all constitutions of the world have constitutionalized their electoral systems. I think it's I think it would be a good thing to constitutionalize the system. And now I only have sort of one concluding slide. I think the constitution making process in Chile promises to be highly interesting and far beyond Chile. For you, it might be interesting and exciting, but it'll be observed, or it's being observed by many people outside Chile. I think the way in which members of the Constitutional Assembly will be chosen is more or less unique. So we are all, everybody who's interested in constitutions is really interested how this will work. And as an outside academic, I just have one wish here, namely that you make it as transparent as possible, because that ex post will enable us to analyze, how it worked, what exactly worked, etc. So it would be really interesting if all the speeches were recorded, if all the individual votes given by members of the Constitutional Assembly were roll call votes, so that one can see whether people changed their minds or what the alliances were among the members of the Constitutional Assembly. But those are the wishes of an academic, and they are only of secondary interest. For you, it's important to make good choices first regarding the members that you want to send to the Constitutional Assembly, and then hope that they will do a good job in writing a hopefully successful new constitution. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Very interesting speech. I would like now to give the floor to Diego first. Would you like Diego to take the floor, please?
Sure. Want me go before Chloe? Okay. So thank you so much, Stefan, for your talk. I have what it would be an initial question. I mean, we talked before, and your talk addressed several issues, but of which I was thinking about raising today. But there is one point that was not covered in your lecture that I think is very relevant for discussion, for our current discussion regarding the Constitution. So you have this paper with Bernd Hayo on the determinants of constitutional change. Why do countries change the form of government? This is a paper from 10 years ago, but a very relevant paper. And when you one of the issues you address in this particular paper is what you call serial switchers. This is countries that change one time the form of government and then they continue changing. I think this is very important for our current discussion, because one of the arguments that the opponents to changing our current system often make is that if we change that any change in the form of government will create like a subsequent effect in which we will be continually switching governments again in the following generations. Your paper addresses this topic quite clearly, so I was wondering whether you would be able to provide us some intuition on this idea that whether this idea of serial switcher is something not that well supported by the literature.
Can we? Is that all, or you want to say something else?
Oh, that's the first question I wanted to make to Stefan. The idea of serial switchers, whether if a country changes from its system of government, it is more likely, less likely to make subsequent changes, and that this kind of change of government puts you in a path toward instability or something like that. That I think it's well addressed in his 2010 paper.
Okay, but may I suggest that we collect all the questions first, because we're a little bit tight on schedule. So I would prefer if you can we can collect all the questions right away. So Stefan can collect them all together and make a final statement, because we have until 3, so it's a bit late.
So you want me to make
if you want
another question?
Yeah.
I mean, if we have few time, I would like to discuss this topic in particular.
Okay. Claudia, would you like to add something? Or?
Yes, I was. I also, I thank you very much for the presentation and for the opportunity to hear and to learn from you. And I have a lot of questions as well, more than comments. I mean, I think so. Well, and I have 5 comments, questions. The first one, that you said, if I understood well, you said that in our case, we should probably move to judicial social rights, and I was wondering why. I mean, because there is a big discussion here about that. I mean, about how to write social rights in the constitutions. And one of the things that happens in Latin America in general is that we put a lot of rights in the constitution, but usually we don't. We don't keep them in practice because of we don't have enough fiscal income And the other thing is, some people say that is this possibility that finally the judicial power has the power to increase social fiscal spending. I mean, public spending. Because they could have, I mean, they would be like the institution and rule over who has the power to do, I mean, to give these rights. So this is something that we are discussing in Chile. As far as I know, I read something about that, and for example, for me, it makes a lot of sense that these rights are in the beginning of the Constitution, in the preamble of the Constitution, like in Germany, like in France. I think it happens the same, that they have this social and democratic state. So what do you think about that? And the second comment, it was about, this is like very particular of the Chilean case as well. We have this idea, especially in the social rights, that we call it the subsidiarity state. Principle. It's not, sorry? The principle, yes, the subsidiarity principle. It's not like written in the Constitution, like in the European case, for example, but it's the idea that the social policies can be given by private institutions, financed with public, I mean, fiscal spending. So, and the power is in the people that has the free to choose between the public institution and the private institution. And so we have a lot of private institutions giving health, education, and social security, for example. And this is a big discussion here in Chile, because there are a lot of question about the efficiency of that institutions. They are like for-profit institutions, and they have a lot of profits, and people doesn't feel like they are receiving a lot of benefits from those social rights. And I mean, there is a worry about that in terms of, I mean, property rights and also social spending. So my question was, is there another particular case like these ones, and how do you see the economic implications of that movement? I mean, to take away this kind of subsidiarity principle in the Constitution. The third question was about, there are a lot of also, in Chile, we have this fiscal policy. I mean, we don't have it in a law or in the Constitution, but we have in practice like a principle, like everybody agrees, a good idea, for example, that permanent fiscal spending has to be financed with permanent fiscal income. So we don't have, the idea is that the public debt shouldn't be so high because of many economic things, no? And they, some people, even me, call it like this principle of fiscal responsibility. So, and there are some ideas of putting that principle in the Constitution, like fiscal responsibility. So what do you think about that? Have you seen it somewhere? And the final comment, it was about this idea of watchdogs. I like that very much. I think it's, in the case of Chile, oh, I forgot one comment. In the case of Chile also, we have in a situation of a lot, not only social conflict and inequality, but also a lack of trust in political institutions, in the political parties, and so how that works. How do you think that works with the parliamentary system? Because I don't know. I mean, maybe I am biased, and I don't know really. But in a parliamentary system, political parties are an important part of the system, of the political system. So how do you think this could be done with a so lack of trust in political parties as well? And the finally was about these watchdog institutions. I think they are very important because of that, because there's so much lack of trust, not only on political institutions, but also in the political and economic elite. And it's not subjective, it's subjective. It's a very objective thing, because there are a lot of incidents of the economic elite that doesn't respect some of the social contracts, basically. But I don't know how that works as well. I mean, because when I think usually the way it works is through vote. No, if you don't, do your job, then the citizens will vote against you. But I think you were proposing something else, like in a special institution. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. Before giving you the floor, Stefan, there is one question from Nicolás Aguilera. He says, how could the new constitution change our economic performance for the better and for the worse? How damageful or beneficial is this new egalitarian political movement for the development of capitalism? This is the second question by Nicolás. I didn't receive any other question from the public. I'm not sure. Okay, I believe you have a lot of material, so we'll give you the floor. And I have some more questions in case we still have time, please.
Yeah, and I'm awfully sorry. I talked for so long. I didn't actually my watch stopped working today. so I thought I had talked about 35 minutes. I'm awfully sorry that I'm taking so much time away.
It's so great to see that a German watch doesn't work. So
yeah, well, I don't know if it's German, it's Garmin, whatever. You know, here it is. It doesn't show it. Well, it works. It's just I forgot to reload it. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, many questions. Let me try to be as concise as possible. So maybe I go, for simplicity, I go in the order in which the questions were being asked. So Diego's question, I guess, refers to the danger that once Chile switches from sort of the age-old established constitutional structure of having a presidential form of government to a parliamentary system, it might start to be to become a sequential switcher. Okay, and that would be unwelcome, obviously, because it would significantly reduce stability. And you know, if there is less stability, that is likely to have a number of direct implications for many walks of society, including the economy, because then investment will be lower, blah blah blah. So I see I entirely see the point. So I see sort of the hesitance in making that jump onto a parliamentary system. But in essence, I believe that sort of a more positive outlook would be that if large parts of the population can discuss the issue, what would be the more appropriate form of government, and there is a very open and transparent discussion, and if there are large shares of the population and huge, a vast majority of the members of the Constitutional Assembly would basically say, hey, what do we have to lose? Parliamentary systems do work in other parts of the world, so there are sort of in a sense examples for it. Take Spain as a country that is somewhat related to Chile. It has been working there ever since the mid-70s. So I think if it's possible to create a broad societal consensus on this, then I don't see why it should not be working. But this is optimism and not empiricism. Then Claudia has had a number of questions. Let me see if I can recall all of them. So one refers to extensive social rights, if I get it correctly, and what we know is if you have a high number of extensive social rights, they often don't mean very much. I mean, there are a number of studies that show that if you make your constitution a list of sort of a wishful thinking, then it will not have very many effects. And I basically think that this is dangerous because if one wants the constitution of a country to be sort of just a civil document, a document that is that the society lives by, then you want to constrain the number of things that are just aspirational or wishful thinking, because every time it turns out to be just wishful thinking, I guess the entire legitimacy of the constitution might suffer as part of that. So I'm not a great fan of putting many social rights that are basically very costly to the state into a constitution. I think that's rather dangerous. We know there are many papers on this that this usually is one important area in which constitutions are not being complied with. And it does not always need to be that the governing are driven by bad intentions. Sometimes it's simply out of fiscal impossibility that it's not able to serve all these aspirations. So I'd be rather careful before including a long list of social rights into the Constitution. With regard to how to set up the social security mechanisms, health service, but I guess in your case it's particularly the pension system. That's obviously a very difficult question, and in Germany this is basically a state thing. So the basic pension system is entirely run by the state, which has advantages and it has disadvantages. Okay, because I mean, if you compare it to private entities, even if the state doesn't make any surplus or is not able to make any profits, any gains from the money it's supposed to be administering, it has the capacity to incur large deficits, which private companies don't have. So in a sense, securing it via the state makes a lot of sense if you're interested in some sort of a minimal dividend. Okay, and this is why we have this in Germany. Other countries have tried to combine, state-run and private systems. That's the switch obviously is very difficult. The thing that we are discussing in Germany right now, which is a huge problem, is that as the population gets older and older, it is very unpopular for politicians to say, "Hey, you guys, you need to work longer." I mean, if expected life years of life, raises by 2, 3, 4 years, everybody wants to be served by the pension for 2, 3, 4 more additional years. So in other words, we are discussing things like for every additional year regarding life expectancy, we increase the mandatory work age by 3 or 4 months. And actually, this ties in with another question. It's not exactly on that aspect that you raised, Claudia, but it sort of ties in. So I've been proposing for Germany, and they seem to be discussing it. I don't really know how seriously they're discussing it, but I've proposed to basically delegate these decisions. What is the minimum work age? What's the level of the pension that you receive? There's like 3 or 4 dimensions that need to be taken care of. To basically give that to an agency which does not need to be re-elected. Why? Because now giving the decision on the size of pensions to, say, the Minister of Social Affairs, or to the Minister of the Economy, or to the Public Finance, or whatever minister, and then this person or these persons having to say, hey, you guys, you need to work 3-4 months longer, or in Germany that we've increased I have to work 2 years longer already, okay, which is, as a professor, is not so bad, but other people don't like that. So in essence, if you are the one who basically has to indicate to the public, hey, you guys, you need to look to work an additional year or 2, or your level of pension will be reduced from 65% of the last pay to 60% of the last pay, because you guys live so much longer. Obviously, this is going to make you unpopular. So politicians try not to make that decision. And then you amass huge amounts of deficit. So if you want to prevent this from happening, one way might be to think about an independent agency or an independent group of experts, demographers, and basically under exactly specified procedural rules, have them make that decision. The advantage is these guys don't need to be re-elected. So in essence, well, they might not be greeted upon on the street anymore, but they have more reason to make sensible decisions than politicians who are afraid not to be re-elected. So this is all I want to say on that issue. Yeah, the fiscal responsibility question, I think that makes a lot of sense. In Germany, we introduced this rule. We have a maximum budget deficit with the current pandemic. So this is also important, to create loopholes with the current pandemic. They have agreed that they consider it as non-binding. So there must be sort of some, for specific situations, emergency situations, if you want. It's nice if there is a way to circumvent that, because otherwise it'll be non-compliance again. Okay, so if you want the document to be taken seriously, think about emergency situations and include them in the rule. I think fiscal responsibility makes a lot of sense, because I think that Germany is doing fairly well during the pandemic, not health-wise. I mean, this is a disaster, but economy-wise, people not ending up in poverty. If you look at the US, they have long lines of people who are starving. This is not the case in Germany. And one reason why this is not the case in Germany is that we've been having a more or less balanced budget for the last couple of years. So now it's easier, it's less costly for the German state to basically take up deficit, hopefully only for a limited time. So in a sense, I believe, yes, fiscal responsibility or balanced budget rules or maximum spending levels or whatever they are called make a lot of sense. Actually, I have done some empirical work on it. So you might be interested to what degree are governments following them. I mean, it could be that, if you're a government, you just spend more than than the Constitution allows you to do. Actually, this is interesting, because what you need to do is not only to have a constitutional budget rule, but you need to make sure that the budget making process is very transparent. So if everybody in the country understands that, hey, what the government is doing there is not really in line with what they are supposed to be doing, then that rule has more grip. Okay, so when you interact budgetary spending rules with the transparency of the budget making process and the budget implementing process, then you do see some significant results. So in other words, it can be done. It's not only a rule that's written in the books and then doesn't have any effects. If it comes along with a high transparency of the process, it can have a constraining effect on government. Question number 4: lack of trust. That is obviously a problem. If you look at the World Values Survey and you look at some of the Scandinavian countries where most people believe they can trust each other, whereas in Latin America, trust levels are generally are really low. That is an issue, and obviously you cannot change that overnight. Trust is a very scarce resource, and it's a very important resource in many ways. But I don't see that parliamentary systems would have a systematic disadvantage compared to presidential systems regarding trust.
I believe Claudia was referring to the fact that there is a lack of trust in members of parliament and in the parliament itself. So it's a bit contradictory moving away from a presidential system towards a body which is deeply mistrusted by people.
Okay, so if that is the point, well, first of all, low trust levels are a problem no matter how you go about that. Yeah. Okay, so we can show that high trust levels have a number of nice features that come along with them, or a number of nice effects. But unfortunately, we know that trust levels are fairly stable over very long times. If you look at second-generation immigrants from Chile in the United States, they will still have the trust levels that their grandparents had. And if you look at the same, if you look at second immigration immigrants to the United States whose grandparents came from Denmark or Sweden, you will still see a very high trust level. So this is, it seems to be very constant, very time invariant. So that is a problem. So in other words, nothing quick can be done here. Then, if I have the chance between putting lots of trust into a single person, the president, or 155 or 390, or in the German case, 598 guys, I would say, the likelihood that we have some reasonable, trustworthy guys among 598 is somewhat higher than, putting all my trust into a single person. But that's a very crucial argument. And well, yeah. I guess the additional question was regarding economic performance. Well, I believe that constitutional rules are very important, and one should make sure that the basic functions of a democratic system should be upkept and should not be endangered by a new constitution. So this is freedom of contract, private property rights, and so on. And that basically echoes only what I said with regard to Claudia before. If you put many social rights, that might be sort of the flip side of the coin. That might be a danger to economic development in Chile.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Not sure whether someone I have one question, but to some extent you already answered it, because I like very much this idea that this kind of new separation of powers that you mentioned at the beginning, in which you have on one side the policy making agencies and then the monitoring agencies, or the policy evaluation agencies, I presume. And you mentioned the central bank, and now you mentioned also with regard to the legal retirement age, because democratic systems have a problem in taking this kind of difficult situation. There's a kind of procrastination of those decisions. My question had to do with climate change measures, because that's also a kind of a problem that will usually drive the democracy to procrastinate, because to take measures against climate change and stuff like that it's always something that can be done tomorrow rather than today. So my general question was that beyond time inconsistency, which other arguments do you think are worth considering in deciding which agencies could have this degree of independence? So I understand that procrastination could be one. Is there any other that you may think?
Well, I mean, you mentioned time inconsistency. I mean, that's the argument in favor of independent central banks, right? And you can apply this to quite a few other agencies. Now, actually, it's interesting. I mean, we have quite a bit of evidence regarding the working and the functioning of single agencies that have been in existence. I mean, we have independent network regulators and all kinds of industries. What is definitely lacking here is sort of a more comprehensive, more complete look at these agencies, and I think that is sort of well, that's something that's open to all academics to think about this, because in a sense I can come up with many arguments to delegate some powers to non-majoritarian institutions, to institutions whose members do not need to be popularly elected. But then at the end of the day, I can think of X, Y, Z as possible policy areas. At the end of the day, I need to ask the question, so what are the democratically elected guys for? Okay, so if we give too many of these policy areas away, what is democracy for? So I've been thinking for years that one should be working on this issue. And I've been mentioning it to various people for years, but I haven't found the time to do it myself. And I'm not a very good normative thinker. But I mean, in the US, there's a huge discussion about what they call the fourth branch. Okay, and this is what they have in mind when they talk about the fourth branch. So the question is, are these primarily watchdogs or are these primarily policy makers, and how should they be appointed? What should be the length of their term, etc. So all of these questions have been discussed, but sort of the general sort of synthetic look at these issues, I'm not aware of, and I think that will be a very useful area to look into.
Okay, great. I believe we are done. I see our audience is falling abruptly, so I would like to thank you very much. Stefan, has been a great talk. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Diego, and people working on the backstage. Thank you very much as well, and our translator. Well, Stefan, we are starting our holidays here in February. It's like August in Germany. So I wish you all a nice rest, even though we are in a lockdown or almost lockdown. But anyway, try to rest. Okay.
Well, thanks very much. I wish you good luck for the entire process. It looks as if I was going to be in Chile sometime early October, so I'll call you guys up and we can have a talk then and see how it goes.
Yeah.
I hope I will invite you to the assembly.
Okay. Yeah. Good luck for that. All the best.
Thank you so much,
Stefan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.